Hello, and welcome to another episode of AI in the Classroom Daily, podcast dedicated to helping educators make sense of AI without the hype. I'm Dan Cogan-Drew, and I use AI as a thinking partner in preparing each of these episodes because I think the best way to talk honestly about AI in education is to work with it openly. So before I get into today's topic, I want to note that the organization I'm drawing on for this episode is Student Achievement Partners. Nuzella has worked with Student Achievement Partners in a curriculum development capacity, so just keep that in mind as you hear what I have to say. So SAP, Student Achievement Partners, just published a piece a couple months ago entitled Keep Text at the Center of a Changing World. SAP is the organization that was central to building the college and career-ready literacy standards. They've spent years working alongside teachers and school leaders on what rigorous reading instruction actually looks like in practice. Their argument in this piece is simple. The tools around reading instruction may be changing fast, but the core work hasn't. Students still need to read complex texts. They still need to think about what those texts mean, talk about them, and write in response to them. And keeping students in direct contact with actual text is still what drives reading development. So the question we want to ask today is, what, if anything, does AI add to this? And what I think the piece surfaces, without quite naming it, is a sequencing problem. And sequencing is something that we've talked about a lot on this show in other contexts, but not yet in reading. So that's what I want to focus on today. So the question isn't whether AI belongs in a reading classroom, it's where in the sequence it arrives. So if you think about how AI tools typically show up in literacy work right now, a student has a passage to read, it's complex, the syntax is dense, some vocabulary may be unfamiliar, and the argument takes work to follow. Now, before the student reads it, though, they may ask AI to summarize it, or perhaps define the hard words, maybe explain what the passage is basically saying. But by the time the student opens the text, then, the encounter has already happened. It's just not been encountered by them. What they're reading at that point is a shadow of the original text. The original is still there sitting on the page, but the cognitive work of approaching it cold, of building meaning from scratch, is already done. Now, if you contrast that with a different sequence where the student reads first, they annotate, get confused, form some impressions, develop questions, then they bring that experience to an AI tool to check their reading, push further, explore something they didn't fully understand, the two versions are quite different. In that second version, the AI is doing something genuinely useful. The student's bringing something to the tool. And they're not the same instructional experience. The text is present in both cases. The AI may be doing similar things in both cases, but the sequence is entirely different. And the sequence is what determines whether the student actually reads. So in prior episodes, we talked about research on the impact of sequencing in creative work. Briefly, for example, a study showed that when university students were given an assignment that asked them to stretch their creative thinking, those that turned first to the AI to brainstorm solutions performed worse when the AI was taken away for a subsequent task. Those that went first with their own thinking before turning to the AI later outperformed the AI first students. This is an analogous point about sequencing in productive fiction, but here the argument is focused on reading. So for classroom teachers, I think the practical question to ask about any AI tool in your reading instruction is, does the tool arrive before or after my students have tried to read the text themselves? If the student can bypass the reading by asking AI what the passage means first, the assignment hasn't been designed with that sequence in mind. It's not a critique of the student, of course. They're going to take the path of least resistance if it's available. It's really a design question. Assignments that protect the encounter between the student and the text do so by being deliberate about when the AI can enter. Now, we talked about this in a related way last week with Manu Kapoor's research on productive failure, the idea that the struggle before instruction is what makes the instruction stick. The same logic holds here. The effort of working through a difficult text, wrestling with syntax, meeting unfamiliar vocabulary and context, forming a first impression that might be wrong. That's not inefficient in a way that needs to be optimized. That's effort, and the effort is the reading. Now, for instructional coaches, when you're observing a lesson where AI tools are present, there's a specific question you can bring to your debrief when you're talking with the teacher. What did students do with the text before the tool arrived? And if the answer is nothing yet, that's worth a conversation. Not necessarily as a corrective, but it's a design question. Teachers are under real time pressure, and many AI tools are explicitly marketed as comprehension supports, tools that help students access difficult text. The framing sounds reasonable, but helping a student access difficult text and doing the initial reading work for a student are not the same thing, and the line between them often comes down, again, to this question of sequence. For district leaders, the AI literacy tools being marketed to districts right now are almost universally positioned as access tools and comprehension supports. The framing isn't wrong on its face, but access support and pre-reading substitution are two different things. And a lot of tools blur that line without acknowledging it. So there's a specific question worth putting to vendors when you're assessing their products. At what point in the reading sequence is this tool designed to enter? Before the student reads, alongside the reading, or after? If the vendor hasn't thought through carefully what the answer is to that question, it tells you something about whether the pedagogy was actually driving the product design. And again, because we're talking about a frictionful experience, some products will bias towards engagement and less friction because what they're looking for is satisfaction from the user that will bring them back more reliably. And that isn't always the same thing as the kind of friction that will lead to meaningful learning. So here's the simplest version of all this. Before a student uses an AI tool on any reading assignment, ask, have they already tried to read it? Doesn't have to be a successful reading, doesn't have to be perfect, but have they already had an encounter with the text? Have they been working on the text before the AI arrived? SAP frames their guidance as, quote, keeping text at the center. That's definitely the right instinct here and consistent with what we're saying. It's just a phrase that can mean almost anything without something more concrete behind it. So what I'm offering here is an actionable approach, which is the sequence question. The text stays at the center when the student reaches it before the tool does. This connects to something the show has been working through a number of episodes, from early work on tools arriving before thinking to the cognitive surrender research from Shaw and Nave to last week on productive failure. The pattern is consistent. When AI enters before the student's thinking, the thinking tends not to happen. Reading is not an exception to that pattern. As AI tools get positioned as reading scaffolds, that word is doing a lot of work. A scaffold in instruction is supposed to support a student in doing something they couldn't do alone, not do it for them. A scaffold helps you climb the wall. It doesn't climb it for you. If an AI tool is summarizing or pre-explaining a text before the student reads it, that's not scaffolding the reading, that's replacing it. The distinction matters, and it's worth applying to every tool that arrives at your school door because a lot of them are labeled as literacy supports. So here are a couple questions as always. Are you seeing AI tools used as pre-reading shortcuts in your classroom? And if so, is that a deliberate instructional choice, or is it just sort of happening by default and by the way the products are being introduced and the way that they're fundamentally designed? When you assign a complex text, what does the student bring to it before any tool enters the picture? Is that first encounter protected in the way that you've designed the assignment? And again, sequencing matters. So I'd love to hear your experience of this question. To what extent are the tools you're using positioned appropriately and still preserving the text at the center? Thanks for joining as always, and we'll see you at the next episode.